I want to talk to you just a moment about the Christian Convention that's coming up next weekend at Baldwin. I want to encourage as many of you as can to go. There will be something special for the ladies. Mark Scott's wife, Carla, is going to be presenting a workshop for the ladies. And, of course, Mark's going to have a workshop for the men, as well as the preaching on Saturday and Sunday. Friday and Saturday. I'll get the dates straight here in a minute. And there will be a breakfast there on Saturday morning. And you can go. It's at 8 o'clock, and then they have the services afterwards. But I want to encourage most of you, if you can, to register, because the money does go to help support the convention, and it's needed. It's $10 for a family and $5 for each individual. Even if you can't go, it would be a nice way of supporting it, and we'd appreciate it very much. Also, there is a youth meeting that's going to be going on. So there's something for everyone. So I want to encourage y'all to try to go, at least try to go once. And the fellow, Dr. Mark Scott, I know him fairly well. Went to school with him up in Illinois. And fact is, he and I used to ride together to seminary. And he's a very sharp fellow, and he has really got something to say. And he'll open up the Word of Scripture for us and help us to delve into it very well. He does a fantastic job. So it would be great. It'd be a blessing to you if you can go, and appreciate it. We're going to be looking at Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 35 in just a minute. The title of the message is The Road to Emmaus. It's a journey of grace and a journey of faith. There was three preachers. They got together in town, and they'd been having a problem in the springtime. One of them says, I've really had some troubles because bats have gotten up into our old belfry where we used to have our bell, and they won't get out of there. We've tried everything we can think of, and they just keep hanging up in there. And another one says, well, he says, I've had the same kind of problem. He says, they've even gotten into the attic of the church. And he said, we've even had fumigators come down, and we can't get rid of them for anything. The other preacher says, well, listen, he says, I might have a cure for y'all. He says, I'll tell you what we did. He says, I took and I baptized every one of those bats, and we made them members of the church, and we haven't seen them since. Luke, only gospel writer who records this particular walk to Emmaus, which gives us some additional testimony about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And now, Cruden's tells us that the word Emmaus means despised. In other words, when it's referring to this little town, it's a little no place. It's an insignificant town, much like Lodebar was. Lodebar is where Mephibosheth was when David sent for him, Jonathan's son, and brought him out of Lodebar. Lodebar means no place or nothing. And that's where he was. It's the same thing. It's simply a town that only reason that we even know about it is because Luke mentions it. Nobody else does. Little Emmaus. And an insignificant town, especially in regard to all of the others there in the Promised Land, especially Jerusalem. They're leaving Jerusalem. They're walking 7 miles northwest of Jerusalem, headed for this town of Emmaus. So let's read about this journey that occurred on Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday. It occurred right after the resurrection. Now, that same day, Two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were walking with each other. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" And they stood still, their faces downcast, and one of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened here these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it's the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day's almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It's true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. I want to take a look at this journey, beginning with the conversation that they were having along the way. Two men who were present when the women brought the news of the empty tomb and about the angel and even about the brief appearance of Jesus. They were there with the rest of the disciples. They were a part of that 120 people who were there. They were a part of the faithful. They were not apostles, but they were disciples. Now, they left Jerusalem and started heading for a small village about 7 miles away. Perhaps they lived there, we don't know. Now, as they walked along, they were discussing all of the events that had recently taken place. They couldn't stop talking about Jesus. They couldn't stop talking about his arrest and his persecution and his crucifixion. And they couldn't stop talking about what their hopes and dreams had been. So they kept talking Now, that was the way that they were kind of treating this, though, is that they understood what the women had said, and they said they felt that the appearance of Jesus was a rumor that they were passing around. It was kind of like the women used to do when they talked over the back fence. It was like the men used to do when they go down to the barber shop. All the rumors in town were spread. And so indeed, here we have a rumor. Jesus has been raised from the dead. They didn't believe those women then, and these two men knew it as well. The apostles themselves didn't believe it at first. And so here they are now. They've left Jerusalem, and now they're walking down the road, and they kept mulling over these events. And then a third person suddenly, who's walking in the same direction, ends up walking beside them. A stranger. And they don't know who it is. It says that his identity was kept from them. He didn't know, they didn't know. So when he joined, he asked him, he said, well, what are you guys discussing? What are you talking about? And this shocked them. It shocked them so much that they stopped dead in their tracks. They looked down at the ground. They hung their heads down. Why? Because they were sad. Because their expectations had not been fulfilled. What they thought Jesus should do was not what he did. They didn't know about the resurrection. They couldn't believe it, even yet. So, Cleopas, he asked him, he said, listen, are you the only visitor here in Jerusalem that doesn't know what's going on? Everybody knows what's going on. It's everyone in Jerusalem is talking about the crucifixion of Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth. Everyone's talking about it. But you don't know? And when they said that, he said, what things? What things? Fill me in, I don't know. So Cleopas told him about Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth, whom the high priests and the rulers had handed over to be sentenced to death. He told how they crucified Jesus. And Cleopas confessed something then. He said, this was the man that we had put our hope in. We had hoped that he was going to be the Redeemer of Israel, the promised Messiah, the one that Scripture spoke about. We expected that from him. We had expected when he went to Jerusalem that he was going to set up his own kingdom. We had our expectations. And it's the third day since the crucifixion. And we are confused and mixed up, and we're going home, basically. Now, he also related to him more of the events of that Sunday morning. He told him how some of their women had reported that the tomb was empty, and they had a vision. Now, that's what he says. Pick up on that, because what is he saying? He's not saying they saw the angel, they saw Jesus, they saw a vision. They didn't see the actual person. They didn't see the actual angel. They saw a vision. And he also told the stranger that some of their companions even went down to the tomb and found it empty. But nothing else. That was it. And this was just too much for the stranger. Too much for him. Because he rebuked them. And he told them how foolish they were. And he told them how slow they were to believe all that Jesus had told them. And all that the prophets had said. So this journey to Emmaus, for them, was a journey of faith. Because at that point, there was no resurrection in their mind. There was only a rumor of a resurrection. There was only a vision of angels. Not the reality of it. The road to Emmaus was going to graciously bring their faith alive. The journey to Emmaus was a journey of faith in which the conversation turned into teaching. It turned into teaching. The stranger. Now, this is the part that kind of amazes me a little bit. He's a stranger. They don't recognize him. And apparently they didn't even recognize his voice. They didn't even recognize his style of teaching, because Jesus taught as no one else taught. He explained as no one else explained. Jesus did it with authority, and that authority was there. He didn't quote all the other people that the Pharisees and teachers of the law quoted. No. And he began teaching them from Moses and telling them about Moses' prediction of the prophet that would come, and about all of the other prophets and all that they had said about the coming of Jesus Christ. All that the Scriptures had said about himself, he opened up to them. And even when he finished teaching them, they had no idea who he was. Now, these two men that heard Jesus teach some of the very same things he was teaching here, because he had already said it to them before. And they were, again, as we said, familiar with Jesus' style of preaching and teaching. But they still didn't realize that it was really him. Of course, it says they were kept from recognizing him. Still, I think that there's something else going on here too as well, because I have had the experience quite a few different times, and I hate to admit it sometimes, that I have seen people out of context and I did not recognize them. And I have had people come up to me and say, "Don't you know who I am? Don't you recognize me?" And I have to say, "No, I don't recognize you. I don't remember who you are. I know I should know, but I don't." I think the worst one of all, or the one I remember the most, was I had for some reason gone to Jacksonville, Florida, and I was shooting pool with a fellow. And that was back in those younger days, you know, when I did those kind of things that preachers won't do. But I was shooting pool with him, and he looked a little familiar, but I couldn't place him. After we played about a game or so, he said, "You don't recognize me, do you?" And I said, "No." He was my brother-in-law. And he was an insurance salesman who had tried to sell me some insurance. You can tell that I wasn't that close to him. And I wasn't expecting him in Jacksonville, of all places, because they lived in Norfolk. So it was out of context. And I suspect that the last person they would expect to see on the road to Emmaus would be Jesus. Now, Jesus was there with them. And finally, they reached Emmaus. And when they got there, Jesus kind of acted like he was going to keep on going. And they talked him into stopping with them because it was almost evening. It's getting late. Let's go have some supper and let's bed down for the night is basically what they were really telling him. And not only this, but I think that it was an invitation to come and tell us some more. Talk to us some more. We're interested in what you have to say. They should have been. They should have been. So then as they sat down at the table to eat, the teaching turned into recognition. You know, it seems so natural if there's anything that happens whereby they should recognize Jesus. This seems to be the ideal thing. Because what did he do? Jesus sat down there with them at the meal. There's the bread in front of them. Jesus gives thanks, as he always did. As he always did, much like we sit down and have grace before we have our meals. He sat down with them, he prayed, and then he picked up that bread and he broke the bread. And he handed it to them. Much like communion. Communion serves to remind us of the presence of Christ. Indeed, here he was. And it was in this breaking of the bread that they recognized him. Finally, they recognized him. Now, they had been one of those disciples who had been around Jesus. They'd been faithful to him. And Jesus, when he started to feed the 4,000, he prayed and broke the bread. When he started to feed the 5,000, he prayed and he broke the bread. And just 3 days ago, 3 days from this time here, he had broke the bread at his Last Supper. And probably did it at every meal that he ate with any of his disciples or people. That's what he did. And so here they sat down. He gave them the bread, and they recognized him. They recognized him. Now, this is the bad of the hard part. The minute they recognize him, it seems like this time is very short-lived, because suddenly, as soon as they see who he is, boom, he disappears. He disappears. I don't think he went out the back door. He just disappeared. Now, this was not just some ho-hum event. This is more like an effective pep talk that a coach gives his football team. He gives them this pep talk and he expects the team to listen and he expects them to take action and get out there and win the game. Jesus is there with these two disciples. He's already been teaching them once again. He's having bread with them. Suddenly he disappears and it dawns on them. A light goes off. And that light inside of them says, hey, we can't sit here. We can't stay here tonight. We've got to get back to Jerusalem. And they hurried back. Now, when they were on the road to Emmaus, leaving Jerusalem, they just kind of shuffled along, sauntered along. They even took time to stop. They weren't in a hurry. It was carrying on a conversation, and they were chit-chatting. Now that Jesus has revealed himself, they realize they've got to get back to Jerusalem. And they're not going to let any of the road that get in the way. They zip on down that road. They're in a hurry now. Not just because it's getting dark, but it's because they've got to get back to Jerusalem. They've got a mission now. They've got to tell everyone else that they saw the risen Christ, that Jesus had taught them and appeared to them on the road. Everyone needed to know that Jesus was alive and that he was real. And how did they know he was real? Because he ate the bread. He was alive and real. So they needed to get back. Their road to Emmaus was a journey of faith, a journey on which they found grace. Not saving grace, but the gift of seeing the resurrected Christ. And that was grace. And grace that was given them that they might share this news with others. Grace is what they received on this journey of faith. And they learned to trust in Jesus. And so recognition turned into action. And that's what, with all preachers, the expectation is we preach, but we want to see some action. When you leave here, a friend of mine, they only had one door going out the back. And he had posted up on the very back of it, he says, "You are now entering the mission field." He wanted them to look at it and to know it every time they walked out the door, to remind them, say, hey, this has been the filling station. Now go do the work. These fellows had been filled. They were at the filling station. Now was the time to go to work. And they did. They did. They went back. Didn't waste any time gabbing. They immediately realized this grace that was given them demanded action on their part. And although it was late, they went back to Jerusalem. No conversation, no stopping. Let's get back. In a hurry. And you can't blame them. They were all excited. They had seen Jesus. And they had the word of Christ. And they wanted to share it. So the road to Emmaus was truly a road of grace. It was a road to faith, because now they believed in the resurrected Christ. Now they understood what Jesus had tried to tell them even while he was still alive. That he would be raised on the third day. And indeed he had been raised. And now they saw him as the resurrected Christ. The road to Emmaus was a journey of faith. Now, it's not that road to Emmaus is not where we need to be going. That's not where our journey is. Our journey of faith is a little bit different. Our journey of faith is what we meet every single day of our lives. Our lives are our journey. And our journey is a journey of faith. Indeed, a faith in the risen Christ. A faith that excites us so that we want to share that with other people. That we want to go out and tell others about the resurrected Christ. God sent his Son to die for your sins.